morning, and welcome to the Global Current. I'm Bill Golda, and I'll be your host this morning as Seton Hall's diplomacy students bring you the latest news and analysis from around the world. This week in news, the French government moves to demolish parts of a refugee camp in Calais. A new study finds that India, not China, now has the worst air quality in the world. And tensions rise in the European migration crisis as Macedonia decides to refuse refugees from Afghanistan. In analysis this week, we'll bring you the effects of rising tensions between the EU and Turkey on the humanitarian crisis in Syria, along with a discussion of gender inequalities in international women's soccer. Then, the Global Current sits down with Daniel Wagner, CEO of Country Risk Solutions, on the evolving field of country risk analysis. Thanks for tuning in this morning and enjoy the show. First up, Marissa Hutton reports on moves by the French government to demolish sections of the Jungle, a long-standing refugee camp near the port of Calais.
Due to the ongoing migrant crisis, a mass exodus of refugees are flooding into Europe seeking safety. Thousands have settled in the French port of Calais. According to the BBC, migrants residing in the southern section of the Calais camp, commonly known as the Jungle, have been ordered by French authorities to leave their makeshift homes or face eviction. Individuals and families alike will have until 8 p.m. on Tuesday local time to exit. Otherwise, they will face forcible removal from the location in order for the temporary structures to be demolished. Volunteers on the ground in Calais state that at least 2,000 people currently reside in the southern part of the camp, with some charities going as far as to say that over 3,000 people are present in this specific area, including 300 unaccompanied children. French officials cite a different estimate, saying that approximately 1,000 people could potentially be affected by the removal order. In addition to the individuals who must physically leave the area, those allowed to stay are losing members and structures of their community. The Jungle has become a hub for many of the French migrants, containing shops, religious structures, and even a school. Unfortunately, some of these community institutions are slated for demolition, including a mosque and a legal aid center. Earlier in January, French authorities asked migrant residents to vacate at least one-third of the Jungle in exchange for accommodations in a separate housing project so that improvements could be made to the Calais camp. The government planned to move 500 migrants into shipping containers that had been converted into living spaces, equipped with heat and electricity. Unfortunately, many migrants resisted the move, unwilling to uproot themselves yet again after finally establishing homes in the camp. Many are also skeptical of the French government's intentions for the future, especially in light of the increased security that has been noted around the port of Calais itself. Others have voiced their displeasure at the provided accommodations. One man spoke to the BBC's James Longman.
This is same like jail. It's a closed camp. This is not good. Try impossible inside. Go outside every night. Go to try England.
RT reports that due to the migrant resistance and ensuing controversy over the French government's eviction notice, the order was reviewed by a French court in the northern city of Lille. The court's decision was originally expected 1 hour before the 8 p.m. eviction deadline on Tuesday, but was postponed until later in the week. For the Global Current, I'm Marissa Hutton.
Up next this morning, Gillian Lope shares the surprising results of a new study by Greenpeace on air pollution in the developing world.
According to the Economic Times, Greenpeace conducted a study of NASA satellite data revealing India has overtaken China's air pollution levels in the year 2015. The NASA satellite measured microscopic particles that invade the lungs, causing both cancer and heart disease. For the first time in the 21st century, the average amount of particulate matter in the air for Indian citizens was higher than that of Chinese citizens. The Washington Post reports that the average annual PM2 level for the Indian capital of New Delhi is higher than that of Beijing's. New Delhi had a particulate air pollutant average of 128, while Beijing had an average of 81. To put this into perspective, Washington, D.C. had an average of 12 in the year 2015. The Economic Times article also adds that the World Health Organization recognizes that India is home to 13 out of the 20 most polluted cities in the world. The majority of these top polluted cities are in northern India. Greenpeace's National Air Quality Index report indicated that 23 out of the 32 stations showed more than 70% exceedance in air pollution beyond national standards in India, which is a tremendous public health risk. While Beijing is attempting to reduce its environmental impact, India has little to no target for reducing theirs. The Wall Street Journal revealed that half of the 5.5 million air pollution-related deaths in 2013 came from India and China. Greenpeace specialists are now urging the Indian government to create a plan to avoid future health impacts on air pollution, such as those instituted in China. The air pollution travels hundreds of kilometers and affects national, regional, and city-level action plans. This is Jillian Lope reporting for the Global Current.
Up next, Connor Breza reports on Macedonia's decision to close its border to refugees from Afghanistan, leaving thousands stranded in neighboring Greece.
Tensions between migrants and border authorities in northern Greece grow high as the Macedonian government announced February 21st that they are closing the borders to migrants from Afghanistan. Following several other EU states' examples, Macedonia will now only accept Syrian and Iraqi migrants. According to the BBC, this decision has left 5,000 Afghani migrants stranded around Athens in northern Greece. Several Greek citizens in the affected region commented on the immigration crisis to RT.
Actually, I feel betrayed because all the refugees come in Athens and the other countries don't even help.
It is unfair, the closing of the borders. Our European fellow states don't treat us justly.
It was not something that surprised me that they're not helping us now. We are a country in a terrible economic crisis and we can't support all these people. I hope they will understand that, but I don't think they will.
I believe that this is very wrong, mainly for the refugees who suffer and have to move from one place to the other. It is also unfair towards Greece because currently we do not have the proper infrastructure to host so many refugees.
Eurostat data shows that migrants from Afghanistan are the second largest group crossing into Europe after Syrians and followed by Iraqis. However, several EU states, including Austria and Macedonia, have restricted further migration to individuals from countries with active armed conflict. As more and more migrants mass at the border crossing camp of Idomeni, the situation becomes more chaotic, leading to what New York Times describes as a response marked with disarray and political sniping. Considering the migration projections done by the Organization for Economic Development, the inflows of migrants are not slowing down, and at least 900,000 migrants will enter Europe in the first half of 2016 alone. With anticipated migration levels so large, the EU will have to decide on new immigration regulations over the course of the coming months. This is Connor Breza reporting for the Global Current.
Coming up next, Megan Ferguson analyzes the souring relations between Turkey and the European Union and what it means for refugees still trapped in Syria.
Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan felt it necessary to remind the European Union of one of his most outstanding physical features during a February 11th speech in Ankara, Turkey. He does not have idiot written on his forehead. Turkey currently holds more than 2.5 million Syrian refugees, and Deutsche Welle explains, out of the 160,000 refugees expected to be relocated to the European Union, only 600 have been moved, and the EU is demanding Turkey continue to hold refugees indefinitely. Turkey is demanding a quota for refugee relocation from EU member states, and EU member states are demanding Turkey first secure its border with Greece, creating a political standoff most recently resulting in the closure of the Turkish border along Syria, and a Turkish refusal to meet with EU member states to discuss legislative solutions to the refugee crisis in Turkey and Europe. However, Salon magazine last week points out, Humanitarian workers struggle to reach civilian victims in Syria and rely on refugee settlement in Turkey and EU member states in order to distribute aid. The current conflict between Turkey and the EU could exacerbate a humanitarian disaster. Turkey's concerns in hosting refugees extends beyond perceived hypocrisy by the EU. The European Council on Foreign Relations reported this week recent attacks by the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, has caused Turkish officials to believe the rebels may be receiving support from Kurdish Syrian refugees. Although Turkey claims it is still maintaining a safe zone for Syrian refugees, its security concerns have caused the country to reduce this safe zone into an area bombed by Russian planes and Turkish forces looking to smoke out Kurdish rebels. These attacks also reduce the effectiveness of humanitarian workers who struggle to enter the area. Without support from the EU, Turkey refuses to increase the size of this safe zone, as more refugees would enter the country without the assurance of potential relocation to Europe. Similarly, EU countries have refused to accept more refugees within their borders, trapping refugees in certain countries and preventing the effective distribution of aid. The BBC earlier this month asserts Greece is resentful of the large numbers of refugees coming from Turkey. As a result, Greek officials have reduced the number of refugees allowed in the country and increased illegal immigration through an often deadly route across the Mediterranean. The Guardian this week elaborates. As illegal immigration to Balkan states increases, humanitarian workers struggle to distribute aid to those who may need it most, as many feel they will risk exposure if they come to receive aid. Increasing frustrations between trapped refugees and Greek officials have led to scuffles between police and migrants. These skirmishes increase the tension between EU member states and Turkey, as Greece claims it must reduce the amount of refugees in the country for safety. As both states argue refugees cannot be allowed to enter, those fleeing years of violence are left with nowhere to turn, and no way to claim humanitarian aid. This is Megan Ferguson for The Global Current.
Next, Karina Hendren analyzes the profound gender inequalities in international women's soccer competitions in the wake of a decision to hold the next Women's World Cup on dangerous artificial turf.
With the Rio Olympics approaching, the entire world will soon shift its attention to cheering on the best athletes in the world. One of the most popular competitions in the Summer Olympics is the soccer competition, and this year will be no exception, especially as the Games are held in soccer-crazed Brazil. The United States women's national team has qualified for the Olympics every year since the inception of the Women's Olympic Tournament in 1996. The national team won the gold medal in every single Olympic Games except for the Sydney Games in 2000, where they won silver. On the other hand, the U.S. men's national team has been playing in the Olympic tournament since it first qualified in 1924, and the closest that they got to medaling was during the Sydney Games in 2000, where they placed fourth. This disparity can also be observed in the FIFA World Cup. The women's team has qualified for every single World Cup tournament since its inception in 1991, winning the tournament 3 times in 1991, 1999, and 2015, and finishing in either second or third place in all other tournaments. The U.S. men's team achieved their best result in 1930, where they received third place and went through large chunks of time without qualifying. This disparity between men's and women's soccer teams is not unique to the United States. However, in most cases, the men's team were more successful. Many attribute the success of the women's national team to the success of Title IX, which called for equal funding in men's and women's sports at the high school and collegiate levels. For instance, the Brazilian men's national team, a team known for its dominance on the soccer field, has won FIFA World Cup 5 times and consistently qualifies and performs well in the Olympics. The women's team, however, has never won a World Cup nor an Olympic gold medal. Brazil is often referred to as the land of soccer. However, their women's national team has yet to have the amount of success that the moniker otherwise denotes. Julie Foudy, a former player for the United States, had this to say to ESPNW about the inequalities between the Brazilian men's and women's national teams.
This is a country that takes great pride in its love of football, and I would argue it's the mecca of football all over the world, but for men's soccer, not for women. And the reason I'm frustrated is because this is a conversation about the global women's game we've been having for over 20 years, and the pace of change is just too slow. Right? What is it going to take to to finally get countries to support women's soccer.
Another example is Spain, whose men's squad won the FIFA World Cup in 2010, but did not have a women's team qualify for the World Cup until 2015 and have yet to have a team qualify for the Summer Olympics. One of the principal issues is that women's teams simply do not receive the same amount of attention from the federations that run them. According to the New York Times, when the Trinidad and Tobago team arrived in the United States for FIFA World Cup qualifiers in 2010, they had only $500, no equipment, and no methods of transportation. The New York Times also reports that the Haitian women's team did not have enough money to go towards World Cup qualifiers, forcing the team to sell rotisserie chickens and T-shirts, which ultimately failed to generate adequate funds. The inequalities between men's and women's squads go on and on. The Japanese women's team, who won the FIFA World Cup in 2011, flew to the London Olympics in coach, while their male counterparts, who only received a bronze medal in 1968 and have never won a World Cup, flew in business class. The Los Angeles Times writes that one of the arguments regarding the disproportionate funding between men's and women's soccer is not of gender discrimination, but a lack of interest and profit. For example, 19 out of the 23 players on the highly ranked German women's national team play for the German domestic league Bundesliga, had crowds of only 800 at their games. Meanwhile, domestic leagues such as the English Premier League and the men's Bundesliga draw tens of millions of viewers each weekend. Unfortunately, FIFA has not been doing much to push the women's game forward. When asked about payment inequalities, FIFA Secretary General Jerome Valcke stated, "That's not even a question that I will answer because it's nonsense. We played the 30th World Cup in 2014, and we are playing the 7th Women's World Cup. We are still another 23 World Cups before potentially women should receive the same amount as men." Sepp Blatter, former president of FIFA, made a mockery of not only female soccer players but of all female athletes when he stated, "Let the women play in more feminine clothes like they do in volleyball." Blatter went on to suggest that female soccer players should wear tighter shorts and refer to them as pretty. Also, after being honored at the Ballon d'Or ceremony, Alex Morgan, arguably one of the most well-known American soccer players, stated that Sepp Blatter had no idea who she was. Members of the Canadian and American women's national teams came together in order to file a lawsuit against FIFA and Blatter, who decided that the 2015 Women's World Cup was to be played on artificial turf, which is something that the men's teams have never been subject to. Playing on turf results in terrible turf burns, and some even speak of lingering muscle and joint pain. Sydney Leroux, a forward for the women's U.S. national team, said this to USA Today regarding the turf issue.
The men would never play a World Cup on turf. Some men in the MLS don't even travel when they're playing in turf because they won't play on it, so it would never happen. The sliding and the slide tackling just kind of ruins your legs and causes a lot of raspberries and turf burns.
This, among many other controversies, show that even the governing body of soccer does not bestow the same amount of importance to its female athletes. Going forward, it remains to be seen whether FIFA and the world will see these women as they see the men, as talented, hardworking, and dedicated athletes. Reporting for the Global Current, this is Karina Hendren.
Finally this morning, the Global Current's Emily Livaday sits down with Daniel Wagner, CEO of Country Risk Solutions, to discuss the state of the risk management industry.
All right, good morning, Global Current listeners. This is Emily Livaday. I am here with Daniel Wagner, CEO of Country Risk Solutions, and also co-author of the book Global Risk Agility and Decision Making. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Good to be with you.
All right, first question. What types of services does CRS Solutions provide?
So Country Risk Solutions is a cross-border risk management firm, and we specialize in three basic things. One is to help companies understand and manage cross-border risk through producing creative and unusual country risk analyses, and this could be tailored to whatever they may need. Secondly, we do pre-investment due diligence, which is helping companies understand a place where they're going before they go. And thirdly, we specialize in the acquisition of political risk insurance, which is a specialized form of insurance that helps protect companies that trade and invest abroad.
So when you're analyzing risk, what factors do you tend to look for?
I like to think of risk in terms of a mosaic, as if you're looking at filling in the pieces of a puzzle. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's static. I don't think it's unidimensional. I think it's multidimensional. So people normally think of it in terms of political and economic risk, but I like to think of it in terms of environmental, developmental, technological, etc., types of risks that all form this mosaic that is unique per transaction. So if you can have two power plants sitting side by side in the same country, and they're going to have a different risk profile because they have different agreements with governments, they have different levels of experience operating abroad and in that country, and they have different supply agreements with different countries. So they have to, jump through different hoops in order to get the job done.
It's not even breaking it down just by individual country. You have to break it down within the country, right?
It's by project. So,
Okay.
you think you may know a country, you think you may know a company, but put them together and you're going to have a unique approach to risk. If you're going to manage it effectively, it has to be unique.
So how can you be mindful of a country's sovereignty and cultural values while you're analyzing them?
It's absolutely essential. If you go into a country thinking one size fits all, you're just going to get into trouble. So what's really preferable is for a company to actually spend some time on the ground and understand the culture, the business practices, etc., before they dive in. Those companies that get into trouble the most easily are the ones who simply think, oh, I've been in Asia for 10 years and I've been in China, so that must mean doing business in Indonesia is the same. And of course, it couldn't be more different.
So how can you foresee a financial crisis in the foreign market?
Well, you do have to have a futuristic lens on, but I'm a big believer in the benefits and lessons of history. I think we can learn so much by looking at the past and the present and trying to prognosticate what is going to happen in the future. But I think that history can only be a teacher so far. We can only learn so much from history. The rest is trying to put the pieces of that puzzle together and say, well, if we go in this direction, that will happen, in that direction, this will happen. We try to combine history into a sensible prediction for the future.
So what are some misconceptions about risk assessment that maybe regular people don't catch on to could skew our risk assessment of countries?
I think there's a tendency for people to naturally gravitate to numbers, right? And there's plenty of value to be derived from quantitative risk assessment. But a common mistake that is made is that not enough attention is paid to the qualitative aspects of risk assessment. And I think only if you mix the two can you arrive at the kind of depth of interpretation and analysis that is required to do a meaningful job. So the biggest challenge, I think, is in organizations like banks, which are so heavily quantitative. Sometimes that qualitative risk analysis gets lost in the shuffle, and sometimes they pay the price for it. I think if analysts spend more time thinking about the broader picture in a broader way, they're likely to have a better outcome than they do if they rely either on strictly qualitative or strictly quantitative analysis.
China's stock market crashed in June 2015. Is this just the beginning of a financial crisis, or are they going to be able to pull themselves out, and is it going to be safe to invest in later on?
People have said for so many years that China's headed for a hard landing or China's headed for a soft landing, and there never seems to be a landing at all. Part of the reason is it's not really a truly market economy, and the government can decide if it responds, how it responds, and what impact it's likely to have. I think the Chinese government actually deserves a lot of credit for doing a fairly masterful job at avoiding a landing at all. And the only reason that it hasn't landed is because of some of the things that they've done. But the alarm bells are certainly ringing, and since so many countries have hitched their economic livelihood to China, they're really paying the price now that the Chinese economy has started to slow down. You think about a country like Brazil, which has 80% of its natural resource exports going to China. And they're paying a terrible price. Brazil now is in this terrible recession in large part because of that. So I'm concerned about the impact that China is going to have on the global markets going forward. I'm also concerned about the amount of influence that it has already on the global financial marketplace. But by the same token, I think it's worth adding that during the financial crisis of 2008 and 9, China, its reaction, its central bank's reaction to the crisis, I think really, honestly, they could have sort of taught the West a lot about how to react in a crisis. And they look like the bastions of financial conservatism while the West was busy imploding. So, The Chinese, I think they like people to think that they're really not so savvy, smart, and sophisticated. But from what I've seen in my many visits to China, they're anything but. They really know what they're doing, and I think they actually deserve a lot of credit.
So we've all heard about Greece, how there is a financial crisis there. How safe is the rest of Europe for people to invest?
I think it's useful to think about Europe not as a single entity, but as individual entities, because let's face it, their ability to weather storms, their approach to the migrant crisis, the strength of their financial institutions, each one is very different indeed. So I think Europe is a good example about how to think about the world. It'd be very simple to simply say, oh, well, you have the EU, so it's safe and everything is secure and the financial institutions are not going to go belly up. But as we've seen over the last 6 or 7 years, you can't make those kinds of assumptions. I do think that Europe has a long way to go. I think it's come a long way, but frankly, it hasn't come nearly far enough. And I think they're possibly looking at a multi-decade, semi-recessionary environment. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if this migrant crisis results in a tightening of financial constraints on doing business in Europe, because it seems that the mood among the people and the mood among governments is to sort of tighten the screws rather than let them go on a variety of issues.
So even a country is doing as well as Germany could even potentially be dragged down to the level of Greece.
Well, let's look at it this way. From my perspective, we're well overdue for a global recession. It happens generally every 6 or 7 years. We're in the 7th or 8th year now since that's happened. So if we look, again, looking at history, we can say there's a very good likelihood there will be a global recession either this year or next. That being the case, I think even a country like Germany is in trouble because it's so export dependent for its own economic strength, even within the EU. If those countries that are buying are not strong enough to support what it is that they're trying to do, what they're selling, it's just not going to work.
All right, and then lastly, I wanted to ask you about your book titled Global Risk Agility in Decision Making. Can you tell us a little bit about it? Did you find any interesting research while you were working on it?
Sure. Very excited about the book, actually. It's supposed to come out in May or June by Macmillan. And I co-authored it with a friend of mine in Washington, and we're basically looking at how do risk managers and decision makers need to think about the world in order to stay a step ahead of it, in order to address the multitude of man-made crises that are facing all of us, such as terrorism, cyber risk, and climate change. If you don't think about those in alternative ways and you don't turn the pyramid upside down, it's very likely that you're going to have a problem at some point in time. So the book is really all about how to change the way you think about the world. Risk management, for example, it's sort of come a fair amount of way in terms of adjusting itself to the new century from analog to digital, if you will, but it's got a long way to go, and that's really what the book is all about.
Oh, fantastic. All right, well, this was Emily Livaday for The Global Current, and I am here with Daniel Wagner of Country Risk Solutions. Thank you very much for being here.
So good to be with you. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Global Current. We'll be off the air next week as our student staffers are off for spring break, but we'll be back on March 13th. In the meantime, you can catch up on all of our past episodes by following us on Facebook and YouTube. For The Global Current, I'm Bill Golba. We'll see you next time. The Global Current is brought to you by the School of Diplomacy and International Relations at Seton Hall University. Our executive producer is Alicia Sharabali. Our associate producer is Bill Golda. Our news editor is John Jadot, and our analysis editor is Blythe Brady. Our interview segment is produced by Emily Livaday. The Global Current theme song is Acid Jazz by Kevin MacLeod. You've been listening to The Global Current on WSOU 89.5 FM, Seton Hall's Pirate Radio.